I mean, yeah, like, listen, man, this whole thing is just your giant responsibility. That's all.
Start the game already!
We got problems.
We built our house on shifting sand. I think we'll be fine. I should probably confess I am drinking gin and tonic in honor of the sort of late summerness of the situation, the fleeting final days of summer here in the Great White North. And I should confess that this one is mostly tonic, but the one before it was mostly gin. So the pants may fall off early tonight.
You're wearing pants?
For the moment. For the moment. What have you got?
I have a Summersby pear cider.
Back to the old faithful standbys.
I did very limited shopping. I did it at like Walmart.
Oh.
So I was like, yeah, we'll grab a few of those. And they've been sitting in my fridge.
We've actually run into some shortages here, which is weird. Like Whitewater Brewery, which is right down the road, has like their sort of most popular thing is Farmer's Daughter, which you may have seen. It's in liquor stores and beer stores all over Ontario. But it's the most popular thing on tap at the golf course. And the last 3 or 4 times I've been there, it's been we just ran out because they can't make it fast enough to supply the people who want it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Even though it wasn't long. The LCBO strike probably had an impact on whatever like surplus supply they might have had.
It threw some kinks in the supply chain, I think.
It's been a while since we've recorded. I had the plague.
Yes, it was your fault this time.
It was my fault this time. I was very, very, very ill.
But you're better now.
Mostly.
Faster. Stronger. We have the technology. We can rebuild him. Fill him up with alcohol. He'll at least be able to do a podcast.
True.
So I wrote down some things. I mean, the very first thing that I wrote down in the show doc for this one was because we were going to record last week and we pulled the plug last minute because you weren't feeling well and there were various things going on in my life. And the one note that I made in the show doc that week was, good thing we're not recording because there's nothing here for us to talk about. And then I had a thing where there's a guy that I golf with on Monday nights named Robbie, who occasionally points out like, hey, you guys haven't posted a new episode in a while. And I said to him, well, you should send us, something. And so I thought, here's a good idea for a new segment, shout outs to subscribers. So far, I know the name of exactly one. So Robbie, here's your mention. Send us a question or a comment or something at podbag@nerdingundertheinfluence.com. You've been called out publicly. Do it.
Yeah. Also, thanks for listening, man.
Yeah. Also that. So, yeah. Do we have anything else to talk about tonight?
Well, you were saying that we had nothing in the doc, and now our doc requires a search engine just to parse all the data in it. So I think there's a few things that we'll probably skip.
Well, let's hit the high notes.
It might be a 5-hour episode. We'll chunk it up.
Part 2 will be even drunker.
Pop-ups are back.
This is something that I noticed the other day. I don't even remember where I was, but it's definitely something I've noticed recently. Like you go to pop-ups used to be a thing. Those of you who are younger on the internet probably didn't have this situation, but there's memes all over the place of you click on something and it says boobs and suddenly you have 30,000 pop-up windows on you. And then browsers started blocking that. And now there's, some things pop up that browsers block that you have to unblock. I noticed the other day that there's a bunch of sites, many commercial sites where you go there and it pops up something like the cookie pop-up is a good one because it gives you the option to opt out of cookies. But there's things like, do you want to subscribe to our newsletter? Would you like to fill out a survey? Would you like us to know where you are? Fill out this before you do that. And I'm like, this is something that we tried to get rid of. And I don't know if you remember, but like Web 1.0, the blink tag in HTML was something that everybody used, and it was so annoying. So text would just go blink, 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 blink. And I just wonder, like, how many of those things that we got rid of because they were annoying are going to come back because they're annoying, so they make for good advertising?
Well, and that's always the struggle, right? Because like the whole thing is about getting attention.
Yeah.
For those that don't understand the difference, and I mean, I build websites for a living, right? So this is kind of my shit. The key differentiator here is back in the old day, and this is also something that I've noticed has been happening more recently too. Not just like the modal style pop up, the sort of like here's an interface element within this existing website that is popping up to grab my attention, like the newsletter sign up, like the promotion that's on, those kind of things. That isn't usually a new tab or a new browser window that's being opened. It is just an interface element. But I've also noticed, like back in the day, especially when you're dealing with like gray area websites,
porn.
Not actually that, but like the file sharing sites and stuff like that.
Sure.
Even if, it's Linux ISOs, right? It's always Linux ISOs.
Of course.
The places I download my Linux ISOs, I don't know if it's like a laxness in Chrome as a browser or some of the extensions that I run that have prevented some of that stuff in the past maybe aren't. They're being circumvented. I find I have to resort on certain websites to using like Brave, which is still Chromium based as a browser, but it catches much more of that stuff, even with the default settings and no extra like extensions or anything, than Chrome does, even with like AdBlock and uBlock Origin and yada yada.
Well, and that was kind of the thing and the reason that I wanted to bring this up, because it's not so much that the pop-ups are back, because they've always been there, right? And there's often if you're downloading something, you click on something, it goes, hey, we've tried to start your download. If it didn't come up, you need to like disable your pop-up blocker for a minute, and that's fine. But the thing that I wanted to talk about more than anything, because you're right, like the stuff that I'm talking about is more or less like an interface element. It's something that's part of the web page, and it's much, much less annoying. And that was sort of part of my original thing, is that you don't get the blink, 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 blink. But there is like almost a war going on. And we saw it with YouTube a little while ago, where it's you could watch YouTube without ads if you had the right combination of ad blockers. But then there's ad blockers, and then there's ad blocker blockers, and then there's ad blocker blockers, right? And it's kind of like it's turtles all the way down. It's this endless war of we want your attention versus I just want to consume the content. And I wonder, like, is there a reasonable medium or a reasonable middle ground where we can all, okay, yes, I will watch some of your ads as long as they're not too intrusive, too often, et cetera, et cetera. Because everything is turning into like television, where it's, this hour has 42 minutes, no 38 minutes, no 36 minutes.
Yeah. And I think we need to make the distinction between ads, right? Like the YouTube thing, like that's part of their revenue. So of course they're going to be pretty sensitive to that. Then there's the other side of it, just the attention grabby sort of things. The equivalent of like a bricks and mortar store that has like an open sign on the front that's flashing. Or, as soon as you walk in, there's a big chalkboard with like today's specials in a restaurant or something like that. Like a lot of the interface elements that live within like a commercial website tend to fall into that category more. And what I can say is this: I recently shipped a site specializing in like, it was an e-commerce site for like cremation goods and accessories and whatnot.
Oh.
And I essentially recreated the functionality of a marquee tag.
You're going to have to remind me. It's been a while since I did HTML.
So rather than a blink tag, the marquee was the one that scrolls from side to side, sort of like the marquee on an old theater kind of thing.
Okay, that makes it. Yeah, now I understand. Yeah, I remember what you mean now. Does the marquee tag not work anymore?
Well, it's something you never had the type of control you would need, and you can only do so much with it. I imagine that most browsers do work with a basic marquee tag. I haven't tested it in a while. To have, the ability to manage transitions and like easing of animations and stuff like that. You do it a little bit differently now, but it's it's not apple and orange. It's like apple and like baked apple with a dash of cinnamon. It's
Yeah,
basically the same
okay.
thing.
Fair enough. I mean, I have a confession to make. I still, if I'm going to make anything web based, and I mean, what I do is very, very rudimentary. I still put the whole thing in tables.
Mm-hmm.
Screw it. I just lay it out with tables, and here's plain text, and there's no CSS, and there's no anything. It's just this is a brick of text. This is what you get. But I mean, for me, when I'm doing stuff like that, it's the information is far more critical than making it look slick and fancy. It's like you need to know that the number is 6.5. You don't particularly care if it's,
Well, and that's something that's sort of not mushy. If I'm a website that needs to sell products and grab attention and convert users into,
yes.
some sort of action, right? I understand the desire for doing whatever you have to do to get their attention, but there's still a significant portion of the internet that is just about here's information for you to read.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there's been some places like Reddit, where it's like, oh yeah, it still looks ugly. And while it doesn't exactly function like the old school web, it feels more like that experience than sort of the modern web experience. But there's so much out there that could be simple text and whatnot that.
The thing that drives me bonkers is that thing, and it's not really popular anymore. And I think there's good reason why it's not popular anymore. Where you used to have sort of an underlying image and it would stay static and everything would scroll on top of it.
Mhm.
Right. And yeah, a large part of, especially making things impactful, a large part of that is psychology. Right. And
Mhm.
if it feels weird, there's a certain value in making people sort of feel weird because then they're going to pay attention. Like this is weird and I don't like it. So I'm going to remember it.
But it's got to feel the right kind of weird.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And if you're not advertising a horror movie, you don't want to weird people out. If it's like, hey, here's our store where we sell comfy weighted blankets. Let me make you feel weird and slimy. Probably not the most effective tactic. But that one really bothered me.
This probably applies less to you, but there is a certain aspect of us looking back at the old internet with like rose colored glasses
Oh yeah, for sure.
where we don't exactly remember it the way it was. As
No.
a fun sort of experiment, like take fairly popular sites and spend an hour one afternoon. Consider this an early parting gift using the Wayback Machine on archive.org and just, throw in a URL for anything and then look back at the snapshots over the years. And you're going to find obviously some broken things where styles and images may or may not have been scraped and archived or something like that, or was relying on loading those resources from a server that's not up anymore. But you very quickly get back to the point where you see essentially old websites the way they were circa basically anything older than about 2010,
Mm-hmm.
2012. And once you get back to that point, like pre-responsive web design, this is the
Mm-hmm.
big thing we sort of take for granted now, right? Like websites that are designed to have fluid enough layouts that they can work for not just the difference between like desktops and phones, right? But also desktop displays of varying sizes and stuff. Like you go back and look at a website that probably had a fixed width
Yes.
design of 640 pixels wide on your like ultra wide monitor that you're using probably 1440p ish resolution on. And it's like, oh, I actually have to zoom in to read any of that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I have actually run across that in a couple of places where because at one time the formatting was you gave it in pixels, right? And in the same way that Bill Gates famously said, like, you'll never need more than 640K. I mean, he didn't actually say that, but he
No.
paraphrased to something like that. And like, and this goes back to my argument about, like, I'm looking at the windows that are on my computer right now where, like, the border is 1 pixel wide. Like, 1 pixel wide used to be a half an inch,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they used to make borders 10 pixels wide. It was like your entire screen was nothing but borders. So yeah, it becomes kind of weird when you look at, like, you go back and play old games like, Baldur's Gate 1, and it's like, oh wow, somebody enhanced this so I can play it in 1024 by 768 and it looks so much better. Because it used to be 640 by 480 and that was it.
I kicked you a link the other day to The Incredible Machine
Mm-hmm.
in a browser. Did you actually like start it up?
No, I didn't, because I was at work when you sent me that link, and
Okay.
I didn't even try and get to that link from work. That'd be bad. But yeah, I played the hell out of the Incredible Machine back in the day. The Incredible Machine, honestly, a large amount of the things that I learned playing that game, I apply in my job now. Not that I have monkeys and I lure them around with bananas, but similar
Mm-hmm.
principles.
But the way we look at old games and don't remember them being as bad as they actually were until we go back and try them, and it's like, oh wow, this is shocking.
Yes.
And when I say bad, I don't mean bad as in like they were bad games. I mean as the fidelity, the clunkiness, the quality of life aspects of it, whether it's controls or features,
The
even just
entire
the
UI.
visuals, right? Like, yeah, UI
Yeah.
design, resolution, the quality of the artwork, like artistically, right? Like, when you had like your nerdy software developers, your programmers doing the art, right?
You end up with ET.
Yeah. You end up with Linux. I mean, basically, he is an early 2000s distribution of Linux. Like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the same thing applies to websites. Like, you think about some websites that you frequented a lot back in the day. And I don't mean like, the bajillion GeoCity sites that all looked different, but bad in the same ways. I built a bunch of those sites myself back in those days proudly. But sites that you thought were slick back then, and then you go back and look at them now, and you're reminded of just how unslick they were. And it's like, wow.
Yes, but you know what? There's a certain amount of, and we've talked about this before too. There's a certain amount of those GeoCity style sites that I miss, where the focus was very much on, this is a subject that I am passionate about. Let me give you the information that I want you to have
Oh, absolutely.
in the succinctest way that I possibly can. I have chosen a background color. I have chosen a highlight color. Those are the only two colors you will see on this site. Carry on. There's actually a guy who does a bunch of statistics for golf, which are going to be almost of no interest to anyone listening. It's called the Pope of Slope. And it was originally, I think, just like a single HTML page, one page, to explain how the slope of a golf course figured into handicap. I'm not going to try and explain it because I kind of understand the concept, but it's sort of mathematically complicated a little bit to explain in a verbally. But he now has like a whole bunch of different things that are there, but he's kept that same format, and it's literally just starkly, here is the information, and here are some links to the backup information and the like a bibliography kind of thing. And it's so refreshing to go. None of it is generated by AI. None of it is flowery. There's a little banner ad in this sort of in the corner, and that's it. That's the whole site. And it's like, man, this is so useful. I don't have to scroll around and try and figure out where the archived shit is if I want to look at something old. It's like, no, here's a list of links. Done. It's like a book. Instead of watching a movie to figure something out, it's like going to the library, getting a book and going, oh, there's a table of contents. This is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, some of that is just old man shouting at clouds, but there is something to be learned, I think, from doing things in a simply presented fashion.
But simply presented does not equal effective. When we talk about it and we think about it through the lens of, wow, it was so much more effective back then. And it feels like it was. But when you go back and look at it and like evaluate it sincerely now, in a lot of cases, it wasn't. In some cases, it certainly was.
Well, here's okay. I think that we need to go one step further up the meta chain and ask, what is the internet for? Because I know that you and I are looking at the internet as two completely different things, right? Like the internet is now just an engine for making money, right? It's how can I get ads in front of faces, more or less. How can I sell stuff? And in the dark old days, it wasn't really like, that existed, right?
Mhm.
But there were lots of people who were like, I have a little bit of space that I can, serve web pages out of, and 30 people are going to look at it. And what we're doing right now, right? Like the
Yeah.
difference between us and the Joe Rogan experience, right? Like where we're here just shooting the shit because we're enjoying it, as opposed to, all right, how can we, get the biggest viewership that's possible?
Yeah.
And that's that. I think that's what we're talking about more so than like, and it's certainly from my point of view, it's not one is right and one is wrong. It's they are very different. And I miss the days when it was just, a bunch of nerds going, hey, this is neat.
Well, I miss the sincerity
Yes.
of the internet back in those days. And I also miss, like, there's a certain gullibility that I had, even as a person that was savvy. Like, I look at the way people behaved and everything felt like a little community. And like, you look at GeoCities in particular, like as a platform, like that's what it was trying to create, is these small communities of people publishing content online, develop a sense of like connection and community between the different pieces and organize them in such a way that, it felt like it was logical. You don't see too many people publishing something as like a simple fan page of anything anymore, right? And I do miss that. I miss my own gullibility that I had. Like I had people, there was a time when I was using things like Yahoo had like small community boards and stuff that you could post on before even Yahoo Messenger as a platform came out. And then things like Yahoo Messenger and ICQ and stuff like that. Like there was a period of time, I'll say between the times maybe I was like 16 and 20-ish, where people would just randomly start talking to you and you would not approach that interaction the way you would now, where it's like, oh, somebody's trying to catfish me or somebody's trying to scam me or somebody, like, it's possible that that stuff was happening then to some degree.
It was.
But also there was just lots of randos that were just reaching out to complete strangers being like, hey, and you'd be like, hey, and I have not everyday close friendship relationships anymore, but like people that I've met that way that I've occasionally kept in touch with,
I don't think that I ever formed any relationships like that, but I definitely had some of those conversations. There's that one thing where there's like a video chat thing now where it's and the meme is kind of like dick, 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 dick.
Oh, like a chat roulette kind of thing.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah. Where I mean, like the idea is sound, but the problem is that there's just some people out there who are like, all right, here's another place where I can somehow find a platform for pictures of my dick.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, there are like 3 penises on the planet that are like impressive enough to make and to platform. And everyone else is just like, man, that's just funny looking.
And I know that this is a me problem, but I'm just so cynical about everything that happens online now. I don't trust anything. I don't give anything the benefit of the doubt. Even something that appears to be sincere, I'm questioning the motivation for it. I'm questioning, okay, well, how does this pay for itself? Like, honestly, it's just a dude that, he has a fan site. He's really, really a big fan of this band, and he just wants you to know how big of a fan he is and talk about stories of whatever it is. Like, that's the kind of shit that you used to do back then. And everybody Sure, you would look at some of it and still say, "Oh, that's cringy."
Oh, for sure.
But you didn't question the motivation so much.
I would like to talk about the idea that things are cringy. Specifically because we had friends up last weekend, and one of them has taken up. They're retired now, and one of them has taken up drawing, like learning to draw, right? And she's continually going, "Well, I'm not very good. I'm not very good. I'm not very good." And my response to that, of course, has changed a lot over the years. Like as a, I don't know, 20 something, it would be like, "Oh, it's so cringe." And now I'm thinking, you know what? Like it's okay to just suck at something. It's totally okay to love something and be bad at it. And that's a lot of what sort of that cringe factor comes from. It's like somebody's super excited about something and we're all like, "Oh man, you can't be excited about anything. You got to play it cool." And I completely get it. Like cuz I still do that. That's still my first reaction. I look at stuff and go, "Ooh, oh, this is way uncool." And I'm making an effort in my brain to go, you know what? If somebody's excited about something, let them have it.
Well, and you gotta be introspective about some of that stuff. Like turn the gaze inward. Like what's more cringe than two middle-aged fat white dudes
Talking about
making a
D&D.
podcast, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it doesn't matter what the podcast is about. Like the mechanics of that situation is just about as cringe as it gets, really.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Whitish dudes.
yeah, the only thing that we would make it more cringe is if like our entire podcast was about pumpkin spice lattes, which I still don't like, but I no longer have an issue with.
I have one or two a year when the season comes around, and that's about it. I like
Yeah.
pumpkin. Pumpkin spice latte isn't pumpkin, you know?
No, it's all the cinnamon and all the stuff and cardamom and whatnot that goes along with it. But I don't particularly I like a slice of pumpkin pie like at Thanksgiving maybe, and maybe a slice at Christmas. And that's about all.
What I dislike about pumpkin spice season, because it is a season now,
It is.
is that
Yep.
it's very much like Christmas, right? Like I hate that November 1st you walk into a Walmart and it's all Christmas stuff, right? The Halloween stuff's in the bargain bins over here, the stuff they had left over. It's Christmas time, baby. I'm a bit of a Grinch when it comes to that kind of shit. I'm sure my wife has told you that many times.
Mhm.
I can be Christmassy. Let's start being Christmassy around like at least December. Let's make it like,
December 15th.
well, I usually say after my birthday on the 6th, not because, my birthday is special, because I tend to pretend my birthday doesn't happen, but like that's about the time where it's like, okay, you know what? You got a couple weeks here. Go ahead and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
A couple weeks should be enough.
It's become like the marketing mainspring of our economy, right? Where like, and I tend to use the word marketing, and I don't really mean marketing specifically. I mean the idea. It's capitalism, basically, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
we have to do everything that we can to take in profit for as long as we can, and it's just going to keep creeping and creeping and creeping. It's whatever excuse we can get to get people in here and part them from their money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the part of it that I could care less. We could have like Christmas stores 24/7, 365, and I would be okay with it if it wasn't like high pressure sales the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the pumpkin spice stuff, because it's become that, right? Like I love the
Yes.
pumpkin spice stuff when it was like, ooh, Starbucks is selling a pumpkin spice latte and it's Thanksgiving weekend.
Fair
Canadian
enough.
Thanksgiving weekend. It's like, you
Yeah.
know what? You got a little time here between like a month between here and like Halloween, the harvest season where this is appropriate. Sure, why
Yeah.
not? But when you start rolling that shit out in the beginning of August, and
Hmm.
it's not just, the Starbucks pumpkin spice latte, it's everybody's doing pumpkin spice everything. Guys, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're taking what was a good thing that people genuinely looked forward to and you're ruining it. It's like the the Tim Hortons roll up to rim that's all app based now. We ranted about this on an episode. Like you took
Yes.
something that was like a license to print money and you've ruined it.
Well, it also Roll Up the Rim to Win used to come out like what, once a year, sort of around back to school, I think. And it would last for 3 weeks, a month. And then it became this sort of 3 month thing that was twice a year. And now, as you say, it's an app, and it's just like, what? Like, eventually the pancake is too thin and it's no longer a pancake. It's now just some amorphous dough.
Same with the McDonald's Monopoly stuff. Like it happened once a year. People dug it. I know that a lot of people, myself included, would be like, oh, McDonald's is doing the Monopoly thing. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Because, hey, it's unique. This only happens once a year and only for, a week or 2 weeks at a time. And
yeah. And now it's 24/7, 365, buy, sell. Yes, you must have this. If you don't have this, you're not cool. Well, I mean, that was an awful lot of mileage out of, hey, pop-ups are bad.
it was. I'm not going to do a special segment for video games unless you have something you want to get into. I just want to mention that I did finish Assassin's Creed Origins, and it wasn't bad. I enjoyed it. It was all right.
Well, if you are about to start Horizon Forbidden West, then I suppose that I should update it and maybe play it a bit.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a slow burn for me, just kind of picking away at it. I'm not going to have a ton of time in the next couple months, I think, but I'm going to get into it. I installed it.
Well, that suits me just fine because I've really had a severe lack of motivation in the last little while. So a little bit of something, and if we can talk about it once a week to say, hey, how far did you get, and what did you find, and here's a nifty thing, I think that'll work.
All right. Well, we do, speaking of a lack of motivation, have a whole bunch of table talk stuff to go over, so let's get into that.
Yeah.
For those of you that have never listened to us before, Table Talk is the part of the show where we talk about Dungeons and Dragons and adjacent type activities. If that's not your jam, feel free to fast forward to the end of this. Probably going to be going on for a while here. But if you're listening to us, there's a good chance you're at least passively interested.
Yeah, well, that would make sense. This is our demographic, after all 30 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked weeks and weeks ago about writer's block. And I remember reading someone somewhere about when the idea of writer's block started. And there was one guy who was using it as an excuse to not finish something. So I'm wondering just exactly how much of the idea of writer's block, and it's speaking specifically about writing D&D adventures and prepping as a DM, how much of it is us sort of internalizing a trope of an idea of a writer's block, and how much of it is just fatigue from everyday life. Because I know that it's really hard to be creative when you're tired out. I get to the end of a day of work and go, I have some good ideas I'd like to write down about, D&D and where we're going from here, but I just want to mindlessly consume some pablum on TV.
I think fatigue is certainly a contributing factor to either people just saying that they have writer's block or potentially a contributing factor to legitimate writer's block. And I think that writer's block is a legitimate thing. I know in my case, as it relates to D&D, often it isn't so much that I have no ideas. I apologize. My dog is going nuts outside, if you can hear that.
I think they can, because I can. It sounds like more than one dog. Are you running a dog fighting ring?
I mean, got to pay rent somehow, right?
I suppose.
No, we've got a couple of dogs in the neighborhood, and we live in sort of a condominium townhousing style complex where it's like row houses almost, and we all have these little postage stamp sized fenced in yards. There's a walkway between them, and you get 1, 2, 3 people that happen to put their dogs out at the same time. And once one of them gets barking, they all get going. You know, if there's the mailman walking by or, you know, anything like that, like
Dad?
Audio Jungle.
back to writer's block. For me, often writer's block isn't that I have no ideas. It's often that I have one idea and that I can't force myself to move beyond it. Like, this is an idea that isn't appropriate or it sucks, and it's all I can think about. It's like having a song stuck in my head where you want to get it out, and you know, you catch yourself humming or mumbling or whatever that song, like 20 minutes later, it's like, no, I need to be thinking about something else right now. And I find that I run into that with my D&D prep. You know, sometimes I'll have an idea for something that's like down the road, and all I want to do is explore that. Or I'll be trying to like really hone in. Like, I got a session that's in 8 hours and I really don't have anything. And I feel the need to have something. And my mind might be, this is sort of related to the fatigue. Maybe my mind is on other things. I'm still thinking about work. I'm still thinking about my personal life. Being able to sort of on demand focus on whatever it is that I need to be focusing on is the challenge, probably more than, you know, just having a vacuum and absence of ideas.
Well, I have almost the mirror image problem, I think, where I very, very seldom have no ideas. I find sometimes I have too many ideas and I can't choose and differentiate. I can't distill them down to something that I can just do. So I have, and I have the exact same thing too, where I'll be looking at the horizon, right? Here's something that I want to do. I have a bunch of stuff prepared that's probably 6 months out, right? And none of it is super detailed, but it's like, okay, here's some ideas that I want to get to, but how do I get from here to there? And it's also like we need to do something, you know, like 'cause I'm hoping that we're going to play on Sunday. And yeah, I'm like, okay, so here's where you are, and here's what's changed. Now, okay, so how do I get from here? And like, now we got to go there. And I've got a few little bits of things prepped. There's going to be so much improv for the next bit. It's going to be, there's going to be lots and lots of dead air. And, okay, I'm not sure. What about this? And now there's ogres or something. But at some point, I hope it's going to pick up to the point where everybody's like, oh, that's where you were going.
Yeah. It's a tough line. I know we've talked about like on rail stuff and the importance of the storytelling being collaborative versus like taking us along the ride of your novel, right?
Yes.
So I think it's only natural that any DM probably catches themselves a little bit over preparing and being a little bit deterministic in how they prepare. Like, these are the things that are definitely going to happen. Well, you don't actually know that those are going to happen, right? You might want to nudge things in that direction, but if you're going to force those things to happen, you might be making a mistake.
Yes. That's actually something that I wanted to bring up because I found the next thing in the list is something that I learned from a YouTuber named Ginny D. Have you ever heard of her?
Yep. I watch her. I like her. I mean, she's
performative, and I kind of like it.
She is performative. She is sort of the embodiment of the modern D&D player. So she is absolutely everything that the old school grognards would dislike.
Yes.
While I've been playing this game for a long time, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, I would not consider myself a grognard. Like, I enjoy modern D&D more than I enjoyed the D&D of old. And I enjoy people that approach the game like her.
Yes, much more
than
it's more enjoyable to play with people like that. But that's one of the things actually, because I made the little thing that's coming up sort of soon here. After watching one of her videos, I watched another one later on where she was talking about like how to prep and how to take some load off of the DM by basically, telling like getting the characters to say, this is what I want to do. Right. And then building a story out of that, as opposed to, well, let me build the story and now everybody exists in it. And I catch myself falling into that trap a lot. And like some of it is habit, some of it is sort of the way that sort of the framework of the game has been built up in my brain over the years. Well, here's the DM, and the DM prepares everything, so the DM has to be responsible for everything, and that's just not true.
No, and it shouldn't be true. And now I'm going to put asterisks on that because at the end of the day, the situation at every table is different, and it really comes down to whatever the dynamic is between you and your players. Like to sort of flip the coin here and tackle it from a different direction, speaking about you, when I was running our game for our main group for a little while, one of the things that I tried very hard and had conversations with all of the players about is, let's make a character that fits into this world. Let's sort of establish what the world is. I need some motivation out of you guys. Like, what is the reason that you're putting one foot in front of the other? We're going to set it up. We're going to agree that an opportunity is going to be given to you, and you're going to have a reason for accepting that offer, right? Because that's going to be how the story starts. Whatever that reason is, like, you have the freedom to sort of make it up. And as a player, like, you were the player that I got the least out of, right? It was like, oh, I'm a space cat and my ship crashed. All right. That doesn't fit in the world at all. We can work with it. we can make it work. But, that's a situation where it's like the DM then has to, right? Like, if you've got a table full of players that are like that, they're like, I don't know, man, what the fuck backstory? I just want to roll some dice. Then as DM, you sort of need to step up and do that extra work. But that shouldn't be the default.
No, agreed. I would like to defend myself a little bit in saying that I presented that idea to you and said, I know that this doesn't fit. Is that okay? And you said yes.
I did. And
if you had said no, I would have done something else.
Sure. It wasn't about, the player that like, I'm fine with characters that don't fit. It's D&D. It's fun, whatever. It's just the challenge of building those motivations. And to a certain degree, our current game suffers from the same type of issues. It wasn't because we actively chose not to put that sort of work into it and establish, like, here's my character and their goals and what they want, but because we intentionally started with like pretty blank slate kind of tropey characters, thinking, well, you guys are going to abandon these characters and play different characters eventually. And then nobody abandoned the characters. Yeah. So
everybody continued on with the same characters. I'm like, these are supposed to be cardboard cutout throwaway characters that we're going to play with for like 6 sessions. Then we're just going to throw everything overboard and start again.
And I think, like, if I were to kick off a campaign now, a new campaign, I would actually have like a session 0 and a session 0.5 with the group. I would have a session 0 where it's like I'm establishing sort of the basics about the world and talking about sort of expectations for the game. This is the type of game we're going to be playing if everybody agrees with it. This is the type of tones, themes we're going to explore. Let me talk about the world a little bit so that in a session 0.5, we can go through character creation together in a way where you have the opportunity to bounce off other characters and even like build existing relationships between some of the other players around the table as part of character creation. I've typically not done it that way before. I'll do the session 0 and then I'll kind of one-on-one work with my players to help take their, help steer, I guess would be the best word. Because I don't create your characters for you, but I will, you'll give me sort of the first draft of like, here's the ideas, and I'll come back with okay, well, there's this and this and this happening in my world, so it would make sense if your character was somehow involved in this, or, here's kind of how those puzzle pieces could fit together. Here's some options if they appeal to you. But what I've never done is sort of had all the players kind of sitting around together, not just building characters, but building an adventuring party.
See, and that's one of the things that is a real big challenge, especially for new DMs, is, you know, you're all at the inn and, like someone runs in and goes, "Oh my God, they've taken my wife." And it's like, all right, well, why are you working together? Who stands up to help? And why do you sort of like, and so I've struggled with that, over time, and I've come up with a bunch of different ways to address it. But having everybody get together and collaboratively figure that out is so much better. In that vein, I've formed this really terrible habit of scrolling through YouTube Shorts, right, and just going sort of next, next. Oh, there's one I'm interested in. Next, 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 next.
Ooh, you're part of the algorithm now.
Oh God, yes. Well, one of the nice things is the ones that I stop on are normally either Dungeons and Dragons related, or they're that one Midwestern guy who does. Have you ever seen? He's like, here's a Midwestern dad mowing the lawn, or how he spends his weekend. I'll kick you a link. He's freaking hilarious. But one of the things that I came across was, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name, but she's the lady who plays. Have you watched the Daredevil series? The TV
Yes.
show.
The Netflix one, yeah.
Yeah. So she is they're sort of their first client.
Oh, so Deborah Ann Wall,
Yes.
Yeah, she's DM'd some actual plays. What was the one that she did?
Anyway, so I can't remember whether it was her or it was the one that popped up right after her. But she has some really interesting wisdom about like how to play D&D. And I saw this video, and it was, "Would you like to play D&D?" Somebody was asking, and the person says, "Well, I don't know. Like, it's a sort of a make believe game, right? Like, how do I have to learn rules and all this stuff, right?" And I'm a very technical person. Like, my first thing is I want to know the rules. I want to know how things work. I want to know what the framework is. And she said, "Well, I just imagine that you're walking through a swamp, and you're like you're an adventurer. So you've got a backpack and you've got a sword and you're wearing boots and a cloak, and you hear a branch crack in the distance as if something heavy is walking through the woods. What do you do?" Right? And I'm like, man, that is such a great introduction to D&D, because that's what it is, right? It's let's pretend, and all the rest of that stuff is just baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a very complicated way of flipping a coin to see whether you succeed or fail at what you think you want to do. And anyway, I just thought that was a really nifty thing, and I had never seen it approached that way before.
Mm-hmm.
And the world needs to think about that. I have spoken.
All right. So you got a note here. How much has D&D changed in characters since you were a knee high to a grasshopper?
I mean, who cares? And that's actually written down there.
But it seems your focus is whether there's room for a little bit of DM versus players.
Yeah, and the reason this popped into my brain because I was thinking about my first DM. Mm-hmm. And in one of the adventures that we played, we came upon a genie, right? We rubbed the bottle, and the genie popped out and said, "You have 3 wishes." And of course, we all know, like, you make a wish. It's the old monkey's paw sort of conundrum of, you make a wish, but the consequences are not always what you think they're supposed to be. And we had a ranger in our party because we were rolling for stats at this point, and he had rolled, I think, a 6 for charisma. And he explained it away by saying, my ranger is horrifically scarred. Is very badly injured and has got a big scar across his face. So his wish was, "I wish my scar was perfectly healed." Poof, your scar is perfectly healed. It was perfectly healed. Nothing changes. Right. And what the sort of example, and the reason that I bring this up is because there is, and there has been in my past experience, a situation, or I guess a thought that the words that you say will be turned against you, right? Which is a tradition in a lot of storytelling, especially if you read into any sort of Irish myth or mythology, mm-hmm. where you make a promise to somebody, but the words that you use in your promise are very important, right? Because if you can get away with violating the spirit of the agreement, by using the wording of the agreement, which is very much the basis of our legal system, then that's fine. And there's some amount of fun that can be had from that, right? Like one of the things when we first started playing is that I think like session 2 or 3 when we were playing Curse of Strahd, somebody like threw their sword or an axe or something, right? And they never said I pick it up, right? And then later on, it was like, oh, did I forget to pick up my like? You would have remembered to pick up your damn, unless there's a circumstance where you don't have like a moment after combat. You pick up your stuff, right?
There's a way I sort of look at a lot of things like this. Obviously, it's about the spirit of it. Like I look at that scene in the movie, the Dungeons and Dragons movie, where they're speaking to the dead. And, you know, they get 5 questions and they're asking questions without intentionally asking questions. And it plays out as a fun thing. That is the most D&D shit ever.
Yes.
But the important thing to keep in mind is as a DM, it's okay for a dungeon master to punish, in quotation marks, characters. It is not okay for a dungeon master to punish players.
Mm-hmm.
And if what you're doing, whether it's twisting words or you know, whatever it is, as an act is punishing a player instead of a character, then it's wrong. I believe it's wrong. So, you know, using that genie example, like I don't have enough detail to know how it sort of played out, but to me, that's more of a player saying, this is what I want for my character, and you're giving me an opportunity to have it, but you're punishing me as a player for not articulating it exactly the way you wanted it. Even though as a character, I'm intimating my intentions, right? So you're working hard to find a reason to punish the player and not give them what they want.
Yeah. I think that there's going back to the D&D movie thing where they're talking to like doing the speak with dead. So let me frame this in a way where I think like the way that they did it was right. We have an amulet, we can talk to the dead. Like this particular dead person, we can only ask them 5 questions. But if we waste the 5 questions on, does this really work? Are you really dead? Were you really
There's
here?
another dead person 10 feet away.
Exactly. We can do this again. If you have like, oh my God, we quested for 6 months to get 1 scroll of Speak with Dead, and you punish them like that, that's wrong.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's kind of how I was approaching this whole sort of wish question was like, you've got 3 wishes. Basically, the one I like in that particular situation, it was kind of a silly wish. So I would say, all right, well, you know, make a persuasion roll to see if you've worded it in such a way that you will get what you want. Right. And, you know, like if you roll really well, then okay, you know, you re-roll your charisma. You know, if you roll really badly, okay, you know, like it's tightened up a little bit and your charisma goes up by 2 or something.
See, and that actually touches on another thing that's sort of tangentially related to this. And that is not being selective about when you as a DM are asking a player to roll, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing worse, I think, than a player puts in the effort to like make a good speech in character. Like they perform at the table, put on a show, and then you just, you know, pick a random DC that's a little bit lowered or something and you ask them to roll for it and they roll badly and you're like, well, yeah, but nobody was listening or that actually didn't happen or, you know, like yet there's times where you just have to sort of embrace what they're doing and say, yeah, I mean, I'm persuaded as a DM, you know, your character is inherently persuasive. If you're trying to do the thing, and this go back to something like what you know Tanya does a lot when she plays as an agent of chaos. You know, she doesn't just go over and hit something over the head with the sword. It's I'm going to bounce off this, climb on this, do a triple backflip, and then do that. Okay, give me the acrobatics, right? Like that's an appropriate situation where that can happen. But sometimes I catch myself doing it where it's like I'm asking for a roll where the whole thing would play out better for both me and the characters if I didn't ask for the roll. Because sometimes you catch myself having to then almost not take back the results of the roll, but like
you've got to shade them. And that was actually my next point, is that it again, it depends on your table, right?
yes.
In a lot of cases, like for example, like a lot of the tables that I've played at before, people weren't really comfortable role playing. So rather than make the speech, they would say, this is sort of the content of the speech that I would like to make, right? And at
Yeah.
that point, it makes perfect sense to roll.
Absolutely.
How would your character handle it? But on the other hand, if they make the speech, I will often still ask for the roll, but it's not, the roll doesn't particularly have a DC to see whether it succeeds or fails.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question of you're going to roll to see how well you succeed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, like you have succeeded. Yes, they look convinced. But the question is, did you, for example, you're making a speech to I don't know, like a bandit camp or whatever, right?
Yep.
You know, you made this speech, you rolled really poorly. The leader's convinced, everyone else not so much,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you still sort of accomplish your goal, but you don't, like, you're not going to have them sort of, following you around like Robin's minstrels, right?
And this sort of gets back to the next thing that you wanted to talk to, going back to the Ginny D thing.
Yes.
So there's a trope, mostly comes from like improv circles, and it gets sort of applied as a blanket rule to things like DMing, that it's yes and related, that you should never say no. And I strongly disagree with that you should never say no. There are times when you absolutely should say no, but it can't just be no.
No. Yeah. You have to give something. And so there's this little table, and Ginny D did actually present this exactly like this. Is
Yes.
D&D is not improv. Yes, and is a wonderful tool, but if it's the only tool in your toolbox, that's going to be a problem. And it expands into this sort of 4-quadrant matrix of yes and, or yes but, right? Which is what I did. Well, like the bandit leader is convinced, but his followers not so much. So he's going to have to work to keep them in line. Or no, and like, for example, no, you've completely failed. And in addition to that, like the bandits are now attacking you because they think that you've insulted them or whatever. Or no, but, like you haven't convinced the bandit camp to, that you're not harmful or whatever, but they have been horribly oppressed by, the local duke, and they've heard of you and you fighting the oppression of whatever. So they're willing to work with you, but not necessarily very closely. Like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. So there's those sort of 4 things that you can do. You should never just say yes either, I would suggest.
No, absolutely not. What I would suggest, I think one of the tools that I bust out more often than any of these is you can try, but.
Yes.
Right? Like you think of I'm going to go steal the pants off the king.
You can try.
You can try, but you see that, the king's surrounded by bodyguards, and, the entire throne room's lined with people. There's archers up on the 2nd level. And I will say, if you want to do this, the DC is, and I'll pull a high DC, the DC is 28.
That's possible.
A nat 20 to me is never an instant success. Like,
it's not
often
supposed to be.
Right. Often it is you didn't fail,
but well, it's not even that. When you're doing skill checks and those kinds of things, a 1 is not a fail and a 20 is not a success.
No, I do look at them for opportunities to inject a little extra shit into it. And this sort of gets into some of the house rule stuff that you want to talk about too. They're more narrative moments for me than they are sort of mechanical moments. Like, I don't look at, if I set a low DC for something, it's a DC 10. You got a +9 with, your bonuses and proficiency or expertise or whatever, and you roll a nat 1. You met my DC. You succeeded, but because it was a nat 1, I'll inject some sort of flavor.
Yeah. And it makes sense to use that as an opportunity for flavor, because it is only 5% of the time.
What I will say is, if you want to play a game like that, there are systems that are designed for that kind of thing where you can get ridiculous. I mentioned that I was watching the Dimension 20 Never Stop Blowing Up which was
Mm-hmm.
the sort of an adaptation of Kids on Bikes, Kids on Brooms. And you have to watch the series. It was like unhinged. It was the sort of like every 12-year-old's D&D wet dream by the end, where it's like, you know, well, I'm going to be a Super Saiyan now, or I'm going to, you know, I'm in a mech suit, and I'm fighting on top of the, you know, the president on top of the White House, which is, it's an airship now, and it's flying, and yada yada yada, right? Like it got so over the top. It was hilarious, but the system was designed for that or adapted for that, and it was thematically appropriate. It's not appropriate in your everyday D&D game to be like, you know, oh, there's a big dragon overhead. I shoot him with my bow, you know? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, make an attack roll. Oh, I crit, you know, like, okay, it's still a dragon.
Yeah, it has 480 hit points.
Yeah,
You still didn't make an impact.
You rolled a 20. Okay, instead of, you know, the dragon just being pissed off, maybe he's going to come down and say, you got a lot of balls, kid. You better put that bow away before I change my mind, or whatever, you know, like there's ways to handle those situations, but there's never an automatic yes, never an automatic no in those types of circumstances. And that table, the yes and yes but, no and no but, captures that pretty well. I like the snarkiness of, well, you can try, but.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you can always try. You can always make the attempt, you know, but it may work, it may not. It may have consequences that you cannot foresee.
And just remember, crying is always a free action.
I saw, speaking of, this is a total tangent, but scrolling through the YouTube shorts, I saw something from Critical Role, which I'm going to have to go back and watch again because the polish has really, really gone on that actual play. And it was Talison's character Percy, I think, right? And someone was like, blah blah blah, and I told you this, and you know you can't tell anyone. And he looked at them and said, "Your secret is safe with my indifference." I'm like, that is beautiful.
Yeah.
That is a turn of phrase. Mwah.
Going back just for a moment, one more point on what you had written here. Is there space for a little bit of DM versus players?
And it's really a soupçon.
I've embraced the idea that your players should always feel like there is, and that they're getting the better of you. Like if you're doing your job as DM well, I think you should almost always make your players feel like they're spoiling your plans. And like the, you know, like if you take the cartoonish sort of like Scooby-Doo, I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids, you know. If you make them feel like there's an adversarial thing, but there really doesn't have to be. Like, yes, your job is to sort of create difficulty and adjudicate stuff that's happening and manufacture challenge and stuff like that. But it's not your job to kill the players. Like, it's not a competition, last man standing.
Exactly. And that was kind of my point, is that like there's obviously you don't want that. It's not, we're not fighting each other.
Killing your players isn't your victory condition.
No.
Now, circumstances can happen in a game where almost killing your players and having your players get out of it by the skin of their teeth is your player's victory condition. And if your victory condition is having fun, and that's how your players are going to have fun, that's how you win. And I think if you can make your players feel like you're a little bit competitive in that sort of playful way, and that they're always getting the better of you, they're foiling your well-laid plans, I think that can enhance their experience, even if for the most part you're just going with the flow, you know?
I think that that's probably a better way to phrase what I was trying to get at, is that the DM and player relationship is potentially competitive without being adversarial.
Yes.
If that makes sense. Because this goes back to that sort of, you know, like the DM is interpreting your wishes in the least useful way for you, right? Which really feels like, are we wasting our time? Right? Like the puzzle was interesting. And like I can absolutely see like a twist of expectations, like oh, hey, you rub this genie's lamp and you make these wishes and none of them work out like you wanted, and then the genie goes back in his bottle and now the lamp doesn't respond or whatever. But underneath the lamp, you find, like a ring of wish, right? And there's one wish and it will work the way that you're expecting.
Yeah.
That can be interesting because then there's this whole like, big disappointment followed by, oh, well, this is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh, well, like we've learned our lesson about making wishes that don't quite work out. So let's be very careful about what we wish for.
Something like that's got to be in the setup, though, right? Like if you
Yes.
say as DM, you found a genie's lamp and he rubs it and the genie pops out and says, "What are your 3 wishes, master?" And you give wishes and then you sort of renege on that sort of setup. That can, even if you have a ring of wish or whatever underneath it, that can leave a bad taste in your mouth. Now, if you as a DM imply, hey, there's a lamp and when you touch it, you hear somebody's voice inside it. And, you set it up and you let them come to the conclusion that it is a genie. And then you subvert expectations a little bit. That's probably a little bit different. You need to keep it fun, though. Subverting expectation needs to be fun.
Yes. Well, I mean, this is me sort of exploring this idea. So I'm not certain that it's the right way to approach it. But I'm thinking more that like it's not just the genie pops out of the bottle and he looks like Robin Williams and he's saying like, "Hey," like he pops out and he looks really evil and angry and upset. You get a really bad vibe. You think maybe he doesn't have your best interests at heart, but he says contractually, "I'm obliged to give you 3 wishes." Yeah, make your wording very specific or something like that, right? Where there's a little bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, like there's certain precedents that you can lean on. The obvious thing that I think of is how typically like devils are portrayed in
Yes.
D&D, where you have like contracts and like the whole thing with them is that the contracts have loopholes and, can be misleading and stuff like that. And often like you're forming a pact with the devil. There's certain expectations that you're dealing with the devil. Like that's why we say you're making a deal with the devil, right? Like you're leaning on the trope. It should be a reasonable expectation that this doesn't turn out the way you would hope it would. And as long as you set it up that way, I think it's completely fine to,
Yes.
not deliver an entirely positive premium wish experience.
If you subscribe to our OnlyFans, though,
right.
all of your wishes will be fulfilled.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. So let's talk some house rules because you had some stuff on here, and there's one thing I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So I think this came from Ginny D as well. I kind of went on a binge because I had never seen any of her stuff before, and I found one, and I'm like, like this is just like the way that she presents this idea is just it's perfect, right? It's nice. She carries a sword. I got to trust somebody who carries a sword.
She had me. I watched one of her latest videos, and it took me a while to clue into what she was doing. I don't know if you've seen it. It's the one where she was talking about DMing in a castle, like as part of a sort of official event where they were like flown to Scotland or something. And anyway, she's just explaining something and talking about how it goes wrong. And then she said, "But strength is my dump stat." And then like 5 minutes later in the video, she says, charisma's my dump stat. And by the time like she got through it all, she'd basically gone through all of them. And I was like, oh, I see what you did there. It took me a while to clue in, but it was quite funny.
It is very good. Yeah, her scripts are very, very good. And her performance is really good too. Anyway, one of the things that she talked about was criticals. And how quite frequently combat is boring. Like we roll a bunch of dice, we say a bunch of numbers, and then we move on to the next thing. And sort of one of the streamlined ideas was like, what do you do with criticals? Is it just like, do we just double the damage? Do we roll the damage twice? And there were a couple of options, and I wanted to get your opinion because I looked at them and went, oh, all of this is kind of neat. And the first one is the Perkins rule, which is roll the dice once and then add that to maximum damage. So pretend that you rolled max damage and then roll the dice again, which is neat. The other one is roll twice, double the highest result. And the one that really got me was that you do your critical, but one person who witnessed the critical gets inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
which makes sense in game. Like that's very much oh, hey, like we're really kicking ass here. I'm hyped.
Mm-hmm. I've thought about like doing some critical homebrew. I'd like I like the Perkins rule in that it streamlines stuff and
Mm-hmm.
it sort of prevents an underwhelming result where it's like, oh, you crit, but you rolled 2 ones, right?
Yeah.
I think if you could, playing online games with the VTT that's handling most of the rolling, if you could implement that kind of rule, I think that would make a lot of sense. One thing I always want to be cognizant of playing in-game rules is that rolling dice is fun. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know what's more fun than rolling a 4 and then auto getting a 6, on what would essentially be a 2d6? Rolling 2 dice. People love rolling dice. People love dice. They've got all these shiny things that they treasure and collect, and all they want is to roll them. Don't take that away from them. And the one downside of that particular crit homebrew is it takes that away from them. You roll 1 dice and then add the highest value of that dice.
Well, okay. So the next thing is like, are there any other ideas? And I've just had one. What if, what if when you roll a critical, your ones explode?
That's a good way to handle it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it was underwhelming, but you get to go again. I really like the idea because we have in a lot of game systems that human beings create, we have this sort of exponential growth, right? Where the better you are, the better you can get. And I really like doing it the other way around, where the better you are, the harder it is to get better,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the worse off you are, the easier it is to get better. So rather than oh, hey, I did really well, so I can do really, really well, it's like I did really poorly, but I can do better.
Yeah, I like the idea of the exploding ones because that doesn't take away, especially in person, it doesn't take away rolling dice. If anything, it adds to it potentially, right?
Right.
Where that rule breaks down a little bit is that it skews heavily in favor of the people that are rolling d4s and d6s versus people that are rolling d10s and d12s.
I don't think that's a problem because they're already doing less damage. So doing a little bit more on a critical isn't really going to skew things that much.
Sure. And statistically speaking, they also have significantly less odds of rolling that one. So, I get it. But mechanically speaking, turning it into a big deal and, oh, it's a 1, I can celebrate, right? You potentially rob some of the players at the table of that experience statistically versus some of the other players. And you got to be conscious of it. But I like that idea. I like that more than just auto taking max damage on one of the dice if you're playing in person. I like the idea of one person who witnessed the critical gets inspiration. What I would say is this would be appropriate if you're a GM that doesn't use inspiration as a tool for rewarding cool shit anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sometimes when you might decide not to, right? Like if you've got a table that maybe you've got 2 people at it that really like to role play, or they really like to narrate the stuff that they're doing. And then you've got other people at the table that are either a little bit more passive or they get the enjoyment out of maybe the mechanics of it or something like that. You have to be careful with, rewarding people for things that other people don't enjoy doing so much or punishing them for it. So you might decide, okay, I'm not going to give inspiration out for people that make an awesome speech or people that come up with a clever solution to a problem or that tactically pull off an insane combo cleverly using the mechanics of their characters or something like that, because it needs to be something that's available for everyone. Now, you can make it available for something else for the other people or whatever. And if you can find a way that everybody gets to enjoy their cookies, then you should be using inspiration as a tool for players being engaged with the game. But if you're not, and it's just sort of a dormant feature that isn't getting used, then I think the idea of using it not to directly reward the person that got the critical, but inspire the people around them is a hell of a way to make use of that tool. I like that.
I think it's really nifty too, because a lot of, especially when you look at like websites and videos and whatnot that describe how to optimize your character, it's all about optimizing your character, right? And this is a way to go, well, okay, I'm going to build my character for crits because it makes my group better, right? Like I can buff my party.
Well, and it encourages that, right? Like
Yes.
teamwork literally does make the dream work in this game. You know, if you
haven't flunked flank,
yep, you know, or you take the time to talk and set up stuff, right? Like you do this, I'll do this, it's going to be awesome. Like the whole is more than the sum of its parts quite often.
And I can say from a DM's point of view, when my players are coming up with elaborate plans, even if I know based on what I've prepared that they are not going to work, it is still freaking awesome.
Yep, absolutely.
For two reasons. Number one, because it means they're role playing a whole bunch. And number two, it means I don't have to talk for a minute.
Those are the best sessions, man. The ones where you have to just chime in when they ask a question, right? You let them roll and they're like, is the door locked? Yes or no? You know, like that's it. And then they go back to playing the game.
Yep.
Yeah, those are the best.
Oh, beautiful moments.
I have one homebrew rule that I've introduced to my games. I talked about it a little bit, but I think it was in a session like that we'd sort of like the unaired pilot kind of thing, and I've refined it a little bit. And it's all the more important now because I'm down a player in my group. So things like CR swings can be a little bit wild if things go a little bit sideways. I don't like the way that 5e handles reaching 0 hit points.
It's an improvement over older editions, though.
Oh, it certainly is. Now, the things that I don't like about it are, one, it's like stuns. Stuns are another thing that I have a problem with. They make sense in like limited doses, but when you tell a player you can't do anything this turn, that's not fun. Like in combat, especially when combat's slow, like they've already waited 15 minutes for it to come around to be their turn, and now you're saying, sorry, you can't do anything. Maybe wait another 15 minutes and we'll see if maybe one of your players has helped you out. And two, the pressure that having a player down puts on other players, right? Either making somebody that's like a support caster that can do healing or something, pigeonholing them into that role. Oh, you had this really cool idea that you've been talking about, but this other player's down, and are you going to risk them rolling a nat 1 because they failed their first death save?
Yeah.
That's not fun either. Now, I like the idea of a player sort of something happening at the 0 hit points. So here's my homebrew. The dying condition. At 0 hit points, you gain the dying condition. And as part of that, you fall prone and can't stand up until the dying condition passes. So you get all of the disadvantages of prone. You can crawl at half speed, disadvantage on attack rolls, melee attacks against you are at advantage, ranged attacks at disadvantage, which could be helpful, right?
Could be.
Especially if you want to be that DM that wants to put pressure on a person that's down by having people attack them, try and finish them off, right? Sometimes it's easy to let up on a player, and it's appropriate to do in a lot of spots, but oh, you're unconscious, so I'm going to focus my attention on here instead of actually putting my sword through your eyeball while you're down. Mm-hmm. You have an opportunity. This will allow you to put a little bit more pressure on them while giving them not a get out of jail free card, but they have something they can do themselves. So at the start of your turn, you make a death save, just like normal. On your turn, you can use one of an action, a bonus action, or movement. Your movement's at half speed because you're prone if you want to try and crawl to cover or something like that. If you use an action, you gain 3 points of exhaustion instantly.
Oof.
If you use a bonus action, you gain 1 point of exhaustion. Remember, if you hit 6 points of exhaustion, you die, and every point of exhaustion has incrementally more negative effects until, you rest that out, right? And you can also use your reaction while dying, but also take a point of exhaustion in doing it. So one of the benefits that this has is it makes things like, especially in combination with my next homebrew rule, healing potions. Just much more flexible, right? it isn't a get out of jail free card because it's not like you can die, pop a healing potion, get back up, go back to 0 hit points and keep doing that. It's harder and harder every time. Remember, like, what is it? 2, 3 exhaustion points before you get disadvantage on saving throws. That includes death saving throws.
Yeah.
But it gives you some wiggle room. It also makes exhaustion more meaningful because I think unless you're one of those DMs that really tries to use rest to control difficulty, often it, like inspiration, tends to be sort of a sidelined game mechanic.
Very much so. It's another thing to keep track of. Like conditions, especially long-term conditions, are difficult to keep track of and remember.
Yeah, so exhaustion in this case almost becomes something like a lingering wound type situation without actually introducing a new mechanic to that. Gives people a chance to, risk. It also allows utility characters to not feel like, oh, so-and-so's down again because they did something stupid or they were too aggressive or, whatever. I guess I have to heal them now. There's an opportunity that person can crawl themselves to safety. If they've got potions, they can use that. There's a trade-off, but it gives them something that they can do. You can probably go through a couple of turns through the initiative order, and they're not bored. They're limited, and reaching 0 hit points still has stakes and lingering effects. But
it becomes more like, because we've talked about this previously, but hit points are not wounds, right? They're basically the number of times that you can dodge a serious impact.
They're like luck points, really. We tend to think of them like health points or hit points, like video games, right? Like as a health pool.
Yeah.
But the important thing to mind is, if your max hit points is 60, you are as effective with 1 hit point as you are at 60. Which,
yes.
Yeah.
And this very much reflects that quite well, because it's, okay, you got to 0, you got hit, and you now have to deal with that injury.
Yeah.
Right? It treats 0 hit points much more like a serious injury as opposed to being knocked unconscious.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot.
The other sort of little homebrew thing, and this, as I understand it, is actually becoming official in the 2024 rule set. Potions is a bonus action when you're applying them to yourself. Now, I don't know the way I treat it is a bonus action if you're drinking a potion yourself, a full action if you're administering a potion to somebody else. I don't know if that's the way they're going to handle that in the 2024 rules. I suspect they might, but that's the way I've been playing it.
I think it might be slightly different because I've only vaguely paid any attention. They've changed the names of the actions because they were confusing, especially for new players, right? Like you have an attack action, but it sometimes gives you 2 attacks.
I'll be getting a PDF early for it. I have one of my players who's getting a PDF. So
okay,
they were selected to get it early, and they're going to pass it along. So
my understanding is that the use an item is actually called an item action. So if you're going to administer a potion to someone else, I think that you would have to burn your item action and your bonus action. So you would still have like an attack action and a movement.
Okay. It'll change the dynamic a little bit. Like, if you're making a potion a bonus action or making it a little bit easier to do, you'll need to turn the knob and just make sure that they don't have as many potions sitting in their inventory.
Which I typically, you guys don't have a lot of healing potions.
No, but we have had people that can heal. Like that is sort of, that is a knob we get to turn to, balance challenge in a party that doesn't have healing and stuff like that. You can dole it out. You don't want to, if you got a person in the party that's like, I'm the healer and I really enjoy doing this, you don't also want to rob them of that experience if that's what they enjoy. You need to maybe have a few kicking around so that if it's the healer that's dying, somebody else can like give them a little, clear.
But speaking of healing, because our paladin has unfortunately, due to life circumstances, not going to play with us for the foreseeable future. So I'm quite happy that we brought an extra player on board because we still have 4 players now. But that is going to kick some things in the balance area.
It's funny. We both lost players this month in our games, and they're both Chris's.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
that's very funny.
for similar reasons.
Just life.
Yep.
Life happens. We're adults. Sometimes we do not have the time to dedicate to this hobby. I wonder if we can convince Ian to play again.
Probably not.
No.
Maybe in a year's time. He's newly married.
Oh,
He's
gosh,
got
yeah.
so much more interesting things going on right now. I wouldn't even ask. Ian, if you're listening, the offer's always on the table for you, my friend, but I know you got better stuff going on right now.
We can teach his wife to play a cleric.
Have you been paying any attention to the both the drama that went on this week with the D&D Beyond stuff, and did you see any of the direct I don't want to say announcements because it was more just like hype videos and stuff that have come out so far, but we got to see a little bit more of the VTT.
I have not. I like only sort of vaguely at the very periphery of my my perception. I may have failed a perception check as that came out. I knew that it was coming. I knew that people were starting to talk about it, so I assumed it was getting a little closer to actual release.
Wisdom's your dump stat.
In addition to charisma, strength, dexterity.
So the TLDR, Wizards and D&D Beyond, and it's the same now, but they both have a history of this, doing the thing they always do. They tried to 4th edition it again. The whole thing with this 2024 handbook is it's like, well, we want to make new stuff, so people have to buy new stuff. And I think legitimately they're doing things like, from what I've seen from the book so far, it's a much better written book. I don't agree with all the changes that they're making, but the 2014 edition of the Player's Handbook, while I love 5e, is garbage. Like the book itself is garbage.
Oh, the book is awful.
Yeah. The organization, the way they introduce players, the way they approach character creation, like it's all over the place. So I think a new book is a good idea, but they're trying to have their cake and eat it too with it's not a new edition. It's still just 5th edition, guys. It's all compatible. We know everybody loves 5th edition. Don't be mad at us. But trying to treat it like a new edition. And what happened is an announcement went out from D&D Beyond that all of the legacy, in quotation marks, material was only going to be available in compendium form, which would have meant the 2014 spells, the 2014, some of the subclass stuff, you wouldn't have been able to actually use them on the character sheet digitally. You would have had to have brought them over like homebrew manually, which when when you bought it for D&D Beyond, like that's the whole point. D&D Beyond isn't give me a shittier PDF version of the book. It's I have this character sheet that integrates all of this functionality. And they're like, yeah, no. And a big uproar, sort of not quite on the level as like when Wizards tried to change the open game license shit, but it was close to that vibe. Everybody jumped on and they quickly retracted it.
Yeah, did you look like the price for all of the material was like $1,400? Can you imagine dumping $1,400 in that material and then them saying, "Oh yeah, but you just have to buy it again"? Right? Like, no.
If you haven't been paying into D&D, like if you haven't bought all the books or you haven't, on D&D Beyond bought all of the supplementary material, that's the other thing that this new handbook is doing is it's making a lot of the stuff that you would have had to have bought 4, 5, 6 books for and making it available in one. Like the number of subclasses available for each class. It's not all of the good ones, but most of them are there and some of the new ones look interesting. So it felt like they were giving you a little bit more, but what they were effectively doing was telling you your old stuff is compatible while making it so that you couldn't use it. That's not compatible.
No, it's compatible if you want to do all the work manually.
Yeah, it's compatible.
That's like
spirit.
saying, you know what? Like your new PC is compatible with your old PC, but you have to actually hand type and recompile all of your old programs.
And worse, it didn't sound like they
Like,
were
no.
originally had any intention on making it like an optional thing, right? Like it was going to be that,
Oh,
you bought the
wow.
book and then like everything in your campaign was going to be shifted to the new character sheet with all of its limitations. Like the impact that it would have had on
Oh,
existing campaigns. Like, what do you think? So now it sounds like they're going to be doing the thing that other platforms are doing and have committed to doing, where it's like, we'll make the other stuff, we'll flag it as legacy, and it should be available there. I would like to see them have a separate character sheet so that when you create a campaign and a character, you can pick, because the character sheets look like they're going to be a little bit different anyway.
they
They've
are.
done away with a lot of the, and I kind of disagree with like some of the like bonds, flaws, ideals, that kind of stuff. Sounds like alignment is coming back a little bit more prominently, which I kind of disagree with. Um, eh. But if you're in an existing campaign or you've already bought all the 2014 stuff and you don't want to throw it away, like you had to know it was going to go over like a lead balloon saying, "Oh yeah, your old stuff's totally compatible, but go fuck yourself."
Yeah, I really liked the traits, bonds, and flaws. Not so much as a like, because there's two ways you can look at it. On the one hand, you can say, okay, these are the boundaries of your character,
Yeah.
and to me, they're not that. They're just the foundations of your character.
No, to me, like I honestly, outside of character creation, I never read them, and none of my players ever read them.
No, it's a guide.
Yeah, it was a good way of getting your players or you as a character, like player, during character creation, thinking about the aspects of your character that are actually important, right? Yes,
Yeah.
there's the stats and proficiencies and stuff, but like, what does
Who
my
are
dude
you?
care about? Who are you? Just at a surface level without 72 pages of backstory. What do I give a shit about?
Yeah.
Like what do I get up in the morning and look forward to?
I would love to see a section of the character sheet that is goals and aspirations. What do you give a shit about? What are you trying to do here? What would you say you do here? I have people skills, damn it.
The other thing that I think is people are mixed on, they did sort of there's a few things that have been happening. They did a live actual play with like Brennan Lee Mulligan, Abri Iyengar, and then like the actors that played Karlak and Asterion.
Mm-hmm.
And
I saw some of that.
yeah, and they were playing in the VTT. It was as a means of promoting that. I don't like it. Just looking at it, like it to me, it is everything that I think a VTT shouldn't be. I'm not going to yuck your yum anybody that likes the sort of 3D mini presentation and like it's slow. They did make some of the map creation stuff look slick, but like I think they probably had a very controlled sort of environment in which to do that. We're going to make really good use of these 17 assets that are available. But they also hinted that it's going to be like a microtransaction collectathon with minis and stuff. And I'm like, fuck that. They did make the smart idea of allowing you to pull 2D maps in and use 2D tokens as well if you want to just do that. But that's not what they're going for. And hey, there's people that actually play using like virtual tabletop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, what is it? Is it virtual tabletop, that game app thing?
Yeah.
I'm mixing it up because I've got both it, I think, and like tabletop,
Oh,
whatever.
there's a tabletop simulator as well.
That's what it is. Tabletop simulator.
Yeah.
There are people that play their D&D sessions like that, and they kind of do that thing where they create 3D environments and stuff. And there's Tailspire is another one we've kind of looked at in the past that does the 3D thing. It looks cool, but to me, it bogged there's a certain pace that I think online games that use a VTT kind of have. And there's a pace that in-person games that minis that use minis have, and they're different paces. And I don't think taking that aspect and applying it necessarily to the online game and the 3D environments and it's just, I don't know. This is a video game, and like map creation, like there's just no way it's going to be as easy.
No.
No matter how much you make it so that you've got all of these assets that you can just snap together and blah, blah, blah. Like they
I mean,
legitimately look like they did a decent job of making that work in the demo that I looked at. But still, like
the problem with having, because this is like, I do 3D modeling for a living. And the problem with having, oh, you've got all of these assets, that's great. Like if I need a simple nut and bolt, right? I have to look at, well, do I want ISO or ANSI or GIS or JIS? And then, okay, do I want within those specifications, what strength of bolt do I want? Okay, do I want fully threaded or half threaded? And like 9 times out of 10, I don't care. Just give me a bolt. And it's the same kind of thing where, like, if it's like, okay, select a table and you can go scroll, 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 that one looks about right. That's fine. But it's like, okay, so I got to click on a folder that says furniture. I got to click on a folder that says tables. I got to click on a folder that says oak tables. I got to click on 4 legs or 3 legs or 2 legs. I got to click on, do I want, fancy or rustic? Okay, now do I want like scarred? Now do I want dark or light? Like you end up with a analysis paralysis, right? Which is a problem in a lot of things. But it needs to be like this. I like Dungeon Alchemist really well for that because it's literally draw a shape. How much automation do you want? Do you want me to just throw some shit in there? Great. Right. And it runs into problems as we saw when I used it for a map, like where, there's windows in my dungeon. But like there's a certain amount of like, yeah, do I want to craft everything? Not really. Like I want to have some amount of control, but at the same time, I don't want to have to, select every last thing. I don't want to set the table. Right? I want to say, put a dining room table in here and it's already set.
They also open themselves up to just annoying people. They're calling it, is it Project Sigil? Something Sigil? Sigil, anyway. And why that's going to annoy people is like it's been an ongoing sort of thing. The City of Doors, how do you pronounce it? Is it Sigil or Sigil? And they've officially kind of come down on the city's name is actually pronounced Sigil. This is very much a GIF versus GIF type thing. If you call them GIFs, fuck you. It's GIF. I don't care what even the person that invented it said. It's not graphics. It's graphics. GIF.
It's pronounced Jife. This is a hill I will die on.
Yeah. The F is silent, actually. It's just G. But yeah, so they're calling this Project Sigil, and as far as I know, the City of Doors still name is Sigil, so that's not going to piss anybody off or confuse them at all. Hey, this is such a minor thing to get annoyed about. Like this is the most pedantic bullshit that you could let bother you. But you're dealing with the most pedantic bullshit people in the world. We play D&D, man.
Actually, the thing is, there's so much legacy stuff that exists and so much of the stuff that, for example, like Gygax came up with is just like anagrams of his name.
Yes. I actually saw some of that, the anagrams of his name bullshit today, because like I got a Humble Bundle email that had a bunch of Gygax, like, I don't know, forgotten lore, forgotten Gygax, some shit. And I was like, hey, that's just his name backwards.
Yes, it is.
Fuck off. Listen, this game that I enjoy in its current form probably wouldn't exist if Gygax and his cronies and friends hadn't set certain things into motion. The game that I love and enjoy barely resembles anything that Gygax had anything to do with.
This is true.
Anyway, I think that's everything table talk related I had to chew over. Did you have anything else?
I don't think there's room for anything else.
Apparently, we have somebody totally wrote us something in on the pod bag. So let's get to that.
You've got mail.
Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to read it? Okay. Dear Nutty, I've been thinking about social media lately, and I wonder if you think you can both avoid any social media, so you can both avoid any social media that includes advertising for 7 days, i.e., no you shit face, Snap Talk, or Reddit bot talk. Sincerely, a totally actual subscriber and not just me writing a letter at all.
Um, it would depend on what you call social media. Twitter, Facebook, all of that stuff, I could do away with no problem at all. YouTube is my primary form of entertainment. Like, I don't use YouTube. I don't engage with it like social media. I don't engage with the algorithm very much. I curate the list of people that I follow, and often when I follow new people, it's the result of sort of organic kind of collaboration, or somebody like Telson tells me, hey, check this out, and I will check them out. So I don't use YouTube. I like social media. I use it like, I don't even want to say TV. I use it like I use Netflix. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I want to watch something, I find what I want to watch and I watch it. So I couldn't do away with that because I don't have cable TV. Download most of the stuff that I want to watch if I don't have it on one of my streaming services or it's not something that's on YouTube. Although I will say I have been watching less and less YouTube because I've been chewing through more and more other streaming content on other platforms, but that's a short-term thing. Twitter I could do away with no problem. You know what? I don't really do Reddit much. I know you're a big Reddit guy. Reddit is my I don't graze Reddit. Reddit is my how can I make this Google search helpful? Site Reddit, and even that's no good anymore.
No, the bots have invaded there. I wrote this question. If nobody could figure that out, I'm sure everybody's already got that. But I wrote it because I recently deleted Reddit from my phone. I deleted Facebook a while ago. I have never been on Twitter or Snapchat or TikTok or Instagram or any of the rest of it. I mean, I still have a Facebook account because it's how my older relatives, and I say older in that like they are 10 or 15 years older than I am. It's how they communicate. They communicate via Messenger. So I still have that. But I used to find myself just being like, I have, I've got like 30 seconds before the next thing that I actually have to engage in mentally. And I reach for my phone and I go to Reddit and go like, what's popular? What's next? What's going on? What's right. And it was a rabbit hole that I found myself going down. I consume YouTube in a similar way to you.
Although you did say earlier that you've started going down the
Yes.
rabbit hole of watching shorts where you just
Yeah.
swipe into the next one.
I have. And I think that's a little bit of a reaction to not
so
having
video
those,
Reddit. Yeah.
pretty much. Not as I don't find myself doing it as much. Like I don't find myself reaching for my phone for that. I find myself going, I want to watch something, but I like all of the channels that I subscribe to haven't updated recently. I'm going to scroll through some shorts and see if that's how I found Ginny D. So, I mean, there is some potential value in going through things like that, but it's how I found Tom Cardy. Which, if you haven't found Tom Cardy, you should definitely go and look him up.
So, ironically, maybe 4 weeks ago, I finally installed Reddit on my phone, the actual app. I was very much I've got an old Reddit account, but I was very much, the person that didn't browse subreddits very much. But as we got into the world building thing and I was working with Incarnate and building out map for my one campaign setting, I ended up getting into some of the world building subreddits, and I was just flipping through them just as sort of inspiration more than anything else. And, I was always one of those people that complained about trying to use Reddit in a browser and always having to dismiss that fucking message. No, I want to use it in the browser. I do not want to download the app. I finally downloaded the app.
It's not great, but it's better than using it in the browser on your phone.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm happy that I deleted it from my phone. I think that if you find yourself browsing and consuming social media in a I need to consume social media kind of way, then it's useful to get off it.
I really should get rid of Twitter. Again, I don't use the algorithmic stuff on Twitter very much. Twitter has been in the past sort of like my news feed, where it's like I'm curating my trusted sources and I'm getting the summaries, right? Like this is I use Twitter almost like an RSS feed, really. It's harder to do that now. It's much harder to do that. There's a lot more bullshit. The enshittification of the product is very, very real. But I also, hockey season's coming up, and one of the big things I use Twitter for is it's like my second screen when I'm watching hockey games and I'm keeping track of stats, and I've got like a bunch of hockey analytics people that I'm following, and I pay attention to it. Like I use it for that. So in between plays and during commercial breaks, like I'll have Twitter up and I'll be sort of getting because you don't get good analysis of hockey watching the game. You get that sort of old school, just absolute bullshit, vapid, empty 200 hockey men analysis. If that, now you're just getting sports betting bullshit. So that was, it was very much second screen type stuff for me there. And I think that'll be the one thing that keeps Twitter on my phone. It is so much worse at being like an aggregator now, which is how I used to use it. So, well, thank you for writing in, totally real person that wasn't Telson.
If you want to send us a question, it's podbag@nerdingundertheinfluence.com. Please do not force me to write another question. They will get consecutively worse and worse until someone sends us a real question. I'm pointing at you, Robbie.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Anybody want a peanut?
So I have a parting gift. I was talking in one of our previous episodes about a forum that I used to go to where Gary Gygax and Frank Metzner, whose name I could not remember when I was describing it, used to post on. It is actually called dragonsfoot.org. And there's still an awful lot of archived posts there from Gary Gygax. It's really interesting to get the perspective from the people who wrote the books, the original rule books, and what they intended and what they were talking about. They were very sort of active community members up until Gary passed away. It's an interesting sort of insight into what they were thinking and how they thought about stuff.
I've never actually checked it out myself.
You should have a look. It is very much a repository of grognards, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Just be forewarned that lines and veils are not much discussed.
Safety tools. Fuck safety tools.
This is our combat simulator.
Bitch.
Yeah, something like that. There's wisdom to be learned. I'm just not sure how much.
Well, there's value in understanding where you came from.
Yes.
You can both appreciate the things that have changed and also shine on a light on the things that haven't changed that probably should when you see them in their most exaggerated, pure, distilled form.
Yes. There's one thing actually that is changing in 2024 that I absolutely 100% agree with, and that is the change from races to species.
Yeah, I'd kind of hope that they're just changing the name. Now they're doing away with the racial bonuses, moving that into backgrounds, which I agree with.
Yep.
I would have liked to have seen them go with more like lineages or something like that, just in terms of terminology, but I think that's mostly semantics at this point.
Yep.
Also doing away with the mixed races, which I find interesting.
I think it makes sense when you start describing the differences as species. Unless you do something like they did in what was the desert one? I always forget. But there was a sort of half human, half dwarf that they called a mull, which was literally just mule with no E. And it was the same thing. It's like, yeah, I mean, you can make offspring, but they're not viable.
Well, and that's why I kind of like the idea of lineages, because it sort of hints to the idea that like they're. If I think of, that Lord of the Rings and the origin for a lot of this stuff. I mean, orcs and things like that sort of existed in dwarves in the common mindset, but there was a very real parallel to actual human evolution and some other hominid species, from Neanderthals and stuff like that before. And I know you got to be careful there too, particularly if you're trying to draw connections and parallels between people that are actually anatomically modern human and trying to maybe label them as something else. But my campaign setting, why this is interesting, because I've been wrestling with the idea. My campaign setting, I've treated it like everybody's sort of mixed in some sort. Like there isn't a lot of like pure elves, pure orcs, pure this. The population has been a melting pot for so very long that one of the interesting sort of explorations that I've done is that certain people, as they've sort of found themselves in my campaign setting, looking at, well, what was it like to be an orc back in the day when orcs were just orcs and not, trying to not necessarily get back to there, but like I don't want to look at it like a this isn't sort of Nazi pure Aryan race shit that I'm looking at doing, but embracing some of the stuff that what it meant to be an orc back in the day, and dealing with the ramifications of living as part of a melting pot civilization. But mechanically speaking, because I wasn't building my own system for my initial playthroughs in this campaign setting, I was going to use 5e. I had to deal with the fact of, well, there's half elves, there's half orcs, but they're really like, do I want to try and pigeonhole dwarves and halflings and something as being like half each other? And, I was going to kind of hand wave it away as, you tell me what you are, and you pick the stat block or the race or species or whatever that most closely represents what you think you are. That was the way I was going to deal with it, because I wasn't going to write a, half halfling or deal, there's this idea that like the only species or race that everybody was sort of crossbreeding with was humans, which was a little bit weird. Like you didn't have, elf orcs, right?
Yeah, and that's a large part of the reason I think they took the half races out.
And I get that sort of as a motivation, but it also, like, you can try and draw your own conclusions and interpret that decision to mean other things. And I hope they explain it.
Yeah, I don't know. I have an alternate idea that I will bring up for our next podcast, because I've been thinking about this a bit myself, but I need to refine my ideas a little bit before I say them out loud.
Like if they do what I think they're doing, and like you're not attaching stats, right, to the species now, they're more flavor.
Yes.
Maybe there's some cultural things like languages and stuff that are attached to them, but they're not mechanically. You're not going to say this one is superior to that one in the way you would have when you're min-maxing,
right?
In the 2014 version. I think that's all good and moving in the right direction, and I applaud them for that. Moving a lot of that stuff into backgrounds and feats.
It functionally makes it lineage as opposed to, racially inspired.
Yeah. I'm nitpicking by saying, well, geez, I just, why didn't you just take that extra step then?
They've got to market the next version,
I guess.
How do you sell the 2034 book?
That'll also be 5e, I guess.
Guess. I don't know. I mean, we had basic for that. There are still people out there running basic and advanced Dungeons and Dragons games because those systems still work.
Well, that's what frustrated me about sort of the idea of trying to have their cake and eat it too, and not alienate the people that love 5e.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they want to sell new supplement shit to those people without doing extra work, right? Like you don't have to write an adventure for 6e and 5e. if you just call 6E, 5E and pretend they're compatible-ish.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is really sixth edition. I can see sort of the inspiration to sort of layer sixth edition on top of fifth edition and say like, yeah, they're compatible, but it's really more of it's almost like treating it as a programming language where you have various like methods that are still available but are being depreciated.
Mhm.
Right? It's like, yeah, this spell is still available, but you should use this one instead.
But you did that before. Like, you had third edition and you had 3.5.
Yeah.
And that was
This
a more
should be
elegant way to
5.5.
doing it. Call it what
Yes.
it is. You know what? We're not throwing everything out. We think there's some things we can tighten up, and it makes enough of a difference in terms of systems to call it something else.
Mm-hmm.
Here, we will be providing guides for adapting 5th edition material to 5.5 so that you can still benefit from using it. But sort of the weird confusion is where it's muddy because you're making it sound like I should just be able to, throw in one of the subclasses, for instance, that didn't make it into the new handbook that got dropped officially, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mechanics for things like when you get your subclasses and at what levels you get stuff are different. It isn't easy to just be like, well, I want to play Tempest Cleric. I'm going to use my old one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we're running into this situation where we're back to like advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which I kind of liked one thing about, which was there was no balance. Balance didn't exist. And there's something wonderful about that, and also something awful about it, right? It's the kind of thing that works depending on how you play it, and I think that like the modern way of doing it, like the 5e way, is more universally useful,
Yes.
right? Because the DM
Not
had
balanced. There's things that are very much not balanced, but at
sure,
no point does anybody feel useless.
right? And advanced Dungeons and Dragons, as a first level wizard, you were useless.
I cast my spell. I'm done, guys.
I'll be back at the inn because I've got nothing left.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. I'm Warden level 5 and I'm a marshal. Well, you're useless now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's not that. It's just the again, it's all motivated by money, capitalism, bullshit. But like, call it what it is. It's a new edition. Make sure that everybody's aware of that. Be honest and say, look, this is very much inspired by 5th edition. 5th edition did incredibly well for us. We would be foolish to, completely abandon it. We've got more D&D players than we've ever had. But at the same time, like, I don't know, like 5e isn't going anywhere. Like, I don't know, it'll depend on the tools that I'm using, I guess. But like, I don't see myself using the 2024 stuff in my campaign until it wraps up. I'm not going to convert characters that already exist, right? Like, I'm not.
No, it would be such a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and it might inspire some people to start a new campaign, and that might be a good thing. But yeah, I can't see switching over either. I can see sort of porting some things in, right? Like house ruling some stuff. Somebody wants to multi-class into something slightly different and they want to use the 2024 rules, because we have a precedent for that where we have like the 5th Ranger, and then we have is it the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that brought out the new Ranger, the Beastmaster specifically, because we have two versions of those and you can use either one.
Yeah, the one Mordenkainen's multiverse or whatever did a lot of shit like that too, where it provided a lot of stuff that we saw in like Volos and whatnot again. So,
I don't know, man. I mean, there's a certain amount of, hey, we've got more D&D players than we've ever had before. We need to find a way to sell them stuff. And there's a certain amount of, you know what, eventually a system starts to collapse under the weight of its own excrement, and you need to shovel that aside and start again. Right? Because I mean, you look at the amount of supplements that are available for second edition D&D, and it's like you can't play that game. If you have all of the supplements, it becomes unplayable.
Yep. It'll be interesting to see how it goes, because I mean, what they've defended themselves against, and maybe this is what it boils down to, is with 4th edition, they tried to drastically do something different, right? And what happened is everybody moved from 3.5 to Pathfinder, because this was, they're doing essentially what Pathfinder was, which was 3.75 on top of 3.5.
Pretty much. And I mean, 3.5 was a pretty good system, and 4th edition wasn't bad, but it just very much felt like it wasn't D&D.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
And we've said it before, probably a better game.
Yes.
As a game, but maybe not a better role-playing game as a cooperative, collaborative game-playing experience.
No, yeah, it lost a lot in the pursuit of everybody must be the same. Everybody kind of became the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The flavor became the thing, and there just wasn't enough flavor to overcome the base blandness of it.
Very much, I think, a reaction to like the homogenization of stuff that was happening in games like World of Warcraft. Like they tried to make the MMO version of D&D.
Yeah. I think it would have been a great video game.
Yeah.
Not a great tabletop game.
Well, man, it's been good talking to you.
And you, sir. I am out of alcohol. We should probably call it a night.
I will try not to get sick and force us to wait 2 or 3 weeks until we record again.
No, it's my turn to get sick.
All right.
Oh, and my pants fell off.